Good evening, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. This is part 2 of Did the Original Scribes Write the Distigmai in Codex Vaticanus? And so we are just over halfway through this article. Now, probably about 2, maybe even 3 weeks ago, I read through the first part of this article. And so if you haven't seen that yet, I would encourage you to go through and listen to that. Basically, I'm just reading through the article, so I might give my opinion every now and then and just sort of try and explain things the best that I know how. I'm just a layman, but I was surprised that I knew about the RF guns that we had used to chemically, or not chemically, but that we used to test the amount of gold in rocks. We used these up in Papua New Guinea, which was quite interesting. So I'm going to start from where we left off. So we're at on their page, on page 145. So this is an article. I'll just go to the top here, just to explain it. It's Did the Original Scribes Write the Distigmai in Codex Vaticanus B of the Bible, Vatican GR 1209? So that's the Gregory Allen number, I guess that is. So this is from the Vatican Library Review, and this is by Brill. And so I know I'm just reading through this. As far as I know, this is in like almost like the public domain, where it says this is an open access article. And so when I looked up this license, it's sort of like, unless I'm repackaging this and selling it sort of thing, I can read through it and explain it. And so that's sort of what I feel that I'm doing. If anyone thinks I'm doing something wrong or whatever, I'll take these videos down. It hasn't been intentional to break any laws or rules, but as far as I know, everyone who knows their stuff has said that I can do what I'm doing. So yeah, back here to page 145. So basically, if you don't go back and watch the video that I've done earlier, and I understand if you don't, what they're looking at is these dots in Codex Vaticanus. And so what these dots had formerly represented were, in Codex Vaticanus, what we see is these dots are sort of throughout the whole manuscript. And we were seeing that many times these dots would appear at textually significant places, like 1 John 5:7, for example, or places where people felt that there were changes, in the critical text, or because Codex Vaticanus and Codex Sinaiticus are the two most important manuscripts to text critics. Now, to people who are Textus Receptus King James people, these are the most unimportant manuscripts, or probably beside Codex Beza, the one named after Theodore Beza, or he had it for a while, so they named it after him. And so we understand that these manuscripts are very important. They make up the vast majority of readings in the Westcott and Hort-based Greek text that is with us still today, in the Nestle Aland and things like that. And so people were saying, well, perhaps these, if Vaticanus is as old as they're claiming, perhaps these dots were in the original. And so sometimes what we would see is it looks like it's part of the original writing. And so people were saying, well, these are original, or if they are original, then that actually backs up the claims of the Byzantine, many Byzantine readings, but also many Textus Receptus readings, that these were genuine, because what it would say then is this document was made, but they knew of these readings, and so they put dots there showing where they had either departed from it or where they knew of manuscripts with these readings. So inadvertently, that would mean that they knew that these readings existed. So a lot of people were saying, well, these could be old. Vaticanus has been dated to about 350, 360, and the same as Codex Sinaiticus, I read about then. Now, is it that old? I'm not sure. Until they actually test the whole entire document, including the inks, we won't know. I'm not sure what the findings were with Nehemiah Gordon, or whether he was actually commissioned to do such a thing, to date, the parchment, or date the manuscript, because you can get old parchment, but it can have new writing on it, and we see that with a lot of fakes and forgeries. One of the best things to do is to get an old parchment, and but now with the technology we have now, you can zoom right in and see where you'll see cracks in the parchment, but the ink's in the cracks, which proves that they've written over it later, much later on. And so, yeah, it's been of interest to everyone, I guess. Everyone on the critical text side, they're like, well, this is fascinating. We want to know, about these dots. But specifically people like Byzantine people or Textus Receptus people. Now, most Textus Receptus King James people are not really worried about these things that much. But because, we believe that the texters follow the church, that these manuscripts, while they're interesting, they're just sort of aberrations of history. Vaticanus, Sinaiticus don't agree with each other. Now, I guess I'm giving you all my opinion on it, but I'm trying to just give you an understanding before we jump into this of why we're just looking at dots on a page, And so what the findings are, so I'm going to give you the spoiler straight out. What the findings are is these dots most probably were when Erasmus contacted, I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing his name correct, Sepuldiva, who was in the Vatican Library. I'm pretty sure he was a curator. They had Bombasius there. Erasmus used to live with Bombasius in Italy, and then they had Sepuldiva. And Erasmus contacted him and got 365 readings from Vaticanus. Now, perhaps this is part of that as well. But perhaps, he might have done his own work and put dots on the page or whatever. But apparently they come from that era. So people were saying that could have been the case. And so it looks like that is probably the case. Now, what it does, it narrows the speculation to, what are we looking at here? We're not looking at these dots going right back to the 4th century or 3rd century or whatever. We're 4th century, I should say. We're looking at these dots being part of the Reformation era, around the time of Erasmus, and some of these marks and dots being done after the time of Erasmus. So, whether it was Sepuldiva or not, or we're going to keep reading through this document, and they sort of speculate a little bit as well. But so that's what we're dealing with when we look at these. Now, I just noticed tonight that Dwayne Green is he's interviewed Heffin Jones. Now, Heffin Jones knows quite a bit about these issues, and he's interviewed him about the Distigmai. Now, Dwayne Green's done a few videos on these and interviewed people who have been key players that you'll see mentioned in this article, like here, the name Payne. So there were people who come up, who discovered these. In a sense, when they discovered them, they saw them. It's like discovering America or something. It's always been there, but it's like someone focused in and said, hey, what about this? And so, I'd encourage you to go to Dwayne Green's channel. I'm pretty sure it's about this time tomorrow night, and he's talking to Heffin Jones about these. So that would be a really good chaser for this program, because I'm just going through reading this, and as you can see, a lot of this is complicated, chemical analysis showing how much copper and zinc is in there, and so some of this I'm reading through it, but I'm skipping over some of the more technical bits just so we can get to the gist of it. But someone like Heffin Jones, he's probably read this a few times, and he'll give a good summary. And even Dwayne Green, he's got his finger on the pulse on this issue. I felt that I wanted to go through this because I had, at the time of my first article, I just interviewed Nehemiah Gordon, who was the guy who went to the Vatican and did this. Now, I couldn't talk to him about that because he hadn't yet released this, but now it's been released. I'm like, oh, let's talk about it. And so let's do that. So as I mentioned, I'll go through this, and when I see something that's a little bit complicated. So it's talking about the XRF test. So the XRF, just so you know, I don't know many of the technical terms, but I do know that that's like it's like a gun sort of thing. Well, you can get them in small form. And when we were in New Guinea, we were testing rocks for gold. And so you go through and you'd someone would show you a rock and you'd go through it and it would be full of zinc or copper, or sometimes it would have no gold. Sometimes it have little traces. Sometimes it have lots. And so the XRF would give you like a percentage. So you do a few tests on a certain rock and see what it is. So that's what the type of technology they're using. Now, obviously, they've got some really nice pictures here. Let's just zoom up. We'll see if these pictures are in the first. Yeah, here we go. So this is their XRF machine. I'm pretty sure that's the XRF. Well, that's the XRF spectrometer. So that looks like it's 100 times more powerful than the one that we're using to look at rocks and things like that. But it's the same sort of understanding. It's looking at basically, because inks, you had to mix certain things in it, and they also mix certain acids in the inks to get deeper colors. And so it's measuring all those type of things, which is very interesting. When you're going through a manuscript and you might look at the first part of the manuscript, it might be a certain type of ink. And as you go through it, it changes because the scribe changed, or they've started sourcing their ink from somewhere else, And so this is all important in aging a document or predicting the age. And yeah, I find it fascinating. I guess if this wasn't to do with the Bible, if it was, say, to do with, early church writers' documents, I'd be like, wow, that's amazing. This is an old early church writers document. But because it is such an important issue to me, the Bible, and these things, this manuscript has basically overridden the whole entire Byzantine text, because Westcott and Hort said, Byzantine's rubbish. So they threw it out, only went with these few manuscripts. And now they're like, well, that was a mistake. And so I think at the end of the day, it is an important issue to me. I sort of am looking at it from arm's length, but it is something that does weigh on my heart, that this manuscript has been introduced into Christianity, and it's caused lots of people to doubt the Word of God. They're like, oh, we don't have the Word of God anymore, or, well, the Bible they had in the Reformation was rubbish. And I often hear this, people will get on, like I was listening to the Myth Vision issue with Wes Huff this morning with Stephen Boyce, and someone made mention of Jeff Riddle, and Stephen Boyce is just like, look, he's just a King James only guy, and just wrote him off. But Jeff Riddle's like very meticulous in what he talks about and what he says, and many times he will, if James Snap's got a similar argument, he'll go, well, he's saying it too, and I just felt that these atheists who are on the Myth Vision show were just laughing and agreeing, like, yeah, you don't want to go into that, flat earth kooky KJV groups, they're weirdos, and I was like, hang on, guys, here are the advocates for the critical text, and they're teaching atheists, agnostics, how to basically say, oh, the last 12 verses are marked, just get rid of them, which this manuscript doesn't have the last 12 verses of mark. And so these things, are close to my heart. But anyway, I want to try and remain neutral as I read through this article. So let's start reading. Now, hopefully I didn't bring any water with me. I might have to zip out halfway through and just grab a bottle of water. But I've got a coffee there, a nice strong coffee. And so hopefully I can read through this without any type of strangeness, weirdness, or destroying my throat. Now, we're just over halfway, and I think as we go through, there's a lot more pictures and a lot more charts at the bottom. So hopefully I don't have to read too much. But let's get into this. All right, where am I? Okay, the Distigmai obelus pairs. As mentioned above, Payne argued that the original scribe recorded 15 Distigmai obelisk pairs to mark textual variants of 4 or more words in the New Testament. He identified one of the horizontal lines, the obolos, as having the same light-colored ink as the original text, whereas other 14 he presumed to be re-inkings of the original lines. We were able to confirm that indeed some of these horizontal lines were re-inked. So we can see that in this picture. The apricot-colored ink underneath is original, and then it's been re-inked on top. But they've tested both of these and found them to be both basically modern in the Reformation era. This is evident at the 50 times magnification when the line of the re-inking does not perfectly cover the original light-colored horizontal line. For example, Payne argued that the horizontal line in the left margin, 1241b9, was an obolos, marking where the doxology is found at the end of the Lord's Prayer in other manuscripts, but omitted from Codex Vaticanus. Under 50 times magnification, 2 lines are clearly visible, with the re-inker's line only partially covering the original line, which it crosses at a 29-degree angle. See figure 14. So that is this one. Oh, that's figure 13. Here's figure 14 here. So you can see the light color underneath and then dark color on top. So that was, I'll just read that, the last part of that. So it's the line only partially covering the original line, which it crosses at a 29-degree angle. To the left of these partially overlapping horizontal lines is a Distigmai, identified as apricot. We compared this Distigmai obolos pair with the unre-inked sigma on the same page that was entirely rewritten by the re-inker on the next line, 1241, A24 to 25. And so we've got the footnotes there, but I was reading through all them, but they're very technical. So I will only read them if I sort of ever catches my eye, and they seem like they're going to help us. The XRF, so that's that machine that can test, how much zinc or copper is in something. Tests indicate that the original horizontal line, I'll just say CU.12, was written in the same ink as the original main text, CU.12. The horizontal line was then re-inked, CU.17, with the same ink to re-ink the main text, CU.20. In contrast, the ink of the apricot Distigmai had a copper value of 0.02. Hence, there appeared to be 3 distinct inks among these 5 scribal features. See table 5. And so we'll find table 5 somewhere. So we got number 1, the original, main text and horizontal line. Number 2, the re-inking, main text and horizontal line. And number 3, the apricot Distigmai. So I'm pretty sure that's, oh yeah, there we go. There's table 5 with all the interesting issues on what the XRF findings are. Okay. So although the Distigmai has what has been identified as apricot ink, it is completely different from both the original ink used to write the main text and the original horizontal line, as well as the ink used to re-ink both. So I'm just checking through this to see if it's worth speaking about. I might just quickly read this 84 footnote. Our tests of the apricot Distigmai involve passing a beam along a line through the left dot and the ink smear that appears to have originated from the 2 dots. We found this ink mass to be homogeneous with no significant amount of metallic impurities in either the dot or the associated smear ink. although it is generally problematic to carry out a test on what may be 2 layers of ink, a left dot and an ink smear, the results in this case indicate that neither layer had significant metallic impurities. This near lack of metallic impurities in the apricot Distigmai was in sharp contrast to the original ink of the main text and the horizontal line, and the re-inking of the main text and the horizontal line. So here we have figure 14, an apricot Distigmai that Payne argued was part of the Distigmai oblos pair. At 50 times magnification, the re-inking of the horizontal line and the adjacent P, so I guess that's a P there, in Beneru, Matthew 6:13, so that would be at the Lord's Prayer, is unmistakable to the re-inking there. So you can clearly see the original, you can see it's been re-inked. The re-inked horizontal line causes the original horizontal line at a 20 crosses the original horizontal line at a 26-degree angle. The ink of the Distigmai appears to have been smeared. So it's interesting. And then we've got the table 5 that they mentioned, which is sort of, if you're a nerdy scientist, you would look at that and go, okay, that's got this much acid, zinc, whatever it is that they're talking about in there. Okay, so the last sentence had, although the Distigmai had what has been identified as apricot ink, it is completely different from both the original ink used to write the main text and the original horizontal line, as well as the ink used to re-ink both. The hypothesis that the apricot Distigmai was written in the same ink as the visually similar original ink of the main text was reasonable, but now has been disproven by the XRF. So looking at those, looking at the makeup of the inks, it is not matching. And so another Distigmai oblos pair was identified at 1243A12. And so, at 50 times magnification, we were able to identify some of the original ink in this horizontal line alongside that of the re-inker. Adjacent to the horizontal line is a chocolate Distigmai. So that's figure. So we've got figure 15 and 16, which we will look at in a minute. We compared the Distigmai oblos pair with an unre-inked nu on the same page, 1243C20, and a sigma added by the re-inker in the left margin of the verso, 1244A24. The XRF tests indicate that the original horizontal line, CU 0.09, was written in the same ink as the original main text, CU 0.10. This original ink was distinct from that of the re-inker of the main text on the verso. Again, the ink of the chocolate Distigmai matched neither that of the original nor that of the re-inker. In this case, there appear to be 3 distinct inks among 4 scribal features. 1, the original main and horizontal line. 2, the re-inking, the main. And 3, the chocolate Distigmai. The chocolate Distigmai at 1243A12 had the same elemental profile as the apricot Distigmai at the same, or 1241, B9, and neither matched the original ink of the adjacent horizontal lines, nor that of the re-inker. These Distigmai and horizontal lines could not have been written as an intentional pair of co-joining symbols in the same act of production, because they were produced with 2 entirely different inks. Okay, so here we see some of the nice pictures that they were talking about. So figure 15. A horizontal line in the left margin of 1243A12. Signs of re-inking are visible on the far left and on the right-hand side. The original ink juts out to the right past the re-inking. Okay, so we see, someone's been a tiny bit sloppy with their re-inking, and they put it close to it, but it's sort of blurred a little bit, smudged a little bit. Not enough of the re-inking was exposed to successfully test it with the XRF. Places where the re-inking overlaps the original ink would not have yielded a useful test, because there would be no way to distinguish which layer of ink contained the varying intensity of metallic impurities. So sometimes they've put it on so perfectly over the old that if you're testing through it, you don't know, what you're actually testing, the underlying or the top layer. I guess as technology improves, they might be able to work on that. Figure 16, a Distigmai obelisk pair with chocolate Distigmai supposedly covering the original apricot Distigmai. So we can see that here, the dark and the light texts. However, at 50 times magnification, the Distigmai exhibits no visible signs of an earlier layer of ink. Note the signs of re-inking of the epsilon n in Matthew 7:21 on the same line, and the top of the lambda, the polloi, in Matthew 7:22 on the next line. Okay, so here we see the epsilon in an n, and then we see P with a polloi on the next line. And so they're saying too that some of these don't actually have an underlying text, underlying like lighter apricot. So here's the table for all the nerds and dorks and weirdos out there who love this sort of stuff. Now, I'm glad that people are doing this. The technology is just amazing nowadays. So Distigmai compared to other scribal features. The elemental profile of the elemental profile of the Distigmai. I need a sip of my coffee. That's what I need. Caffeine will help me through this. That's better, straight away. If you've got caffeine and the Holy Spirit, you're pretty much set. That's all you need in life. The elemental profile of the Distigmai, with its near lack of copper impurities, was unusual among our tests in Codex Vaticanus, with some notable exceptions. The Arabic numerals of the Vulgate chapters in the New Testament, which according to Versace were added in the 16th century, they had some elemental profile as the Distigmai, as far as low amounts of metallic impurities. As mentioned above, Versace argued that these Arabic numerals were inscribed by the same hand that recorded the Distigmai. He based this on two things. One, the color of the Distigmai, and Arabic numerals, which he argued were the same, and two, dots associated with the Arabic numerals that he argued had the same form as the Distigmai. So it says here, actually, I'll read that when I get to it. We carried out 12 tests on 5 of the Arabic numeral chapter notations. It says here, we carried out 5 tests on the Arabic numerals themselves, 6 on the dots associated with these numerals, and 1 test on a chapter symbol in the test that indicates where the Vulgate chapter begins. And it says, and none of them had any significant metallic impurities. This included 1 test of an Arabic numeral of a 15th century replacement page, which continued the numbering of the chapters from the original pages. The intensity of copper to iron in all these Arabic numerals and their associated symbols was measured between 0.00 and 0.03. See Table 7. Like the Distigmai, she's got some more pictures here we'll talk about. And I guess table 7, I'll try and find that. Don't even know where it is. Maybe it was back up the top there, but it's just another one of those tables. Oh, that's table 6. So I'm guessing it's just another table like that, which if you can't read that, you won't understand it anyway. So like the Distigmai, and I'll keep reading through, the ink of the Arabic numerals. I always want to say numeral and have another part to that for some reason. Maybe the coffee's hitting. Arabic numeral, I'm struggling, also appears to have been chemically purified. While the results of our XRF tests might seem to confirm Versace's position that the 16th century Arabic numerals were added by the same hand as the Distigmai, we should offer some caution. When two inks have the same elemental fingerprint with the same proportions of metallic impurities, it suggests they were likely written using the same ink. We have already mentioned how surprising it is that the Re-Inker's ink had the same elemental fingerprint as the original ink of Codex Vaticanus. In any event, when two inks have only trace amounts of metallic impurities, all that can be said is that they have not been proven to be different inks. There is no positive indication from the XRF evidence that they are the same ink. Indeed, this could be said about the Distigmai as a group, both apricot and chocolate. Arguments for Distigmai being the work of a single scribal project must be based on their form and function. XRF is consistent, but this does not prove it. Another scribal feature with the same elemental profile as both the apricot and chocolate Distigmai is the system of Roman numeral chapter numbers recorded in the margins, Versace B 32. So it says down here at this footnote, Versace only mentions these Roman numeral chapter numbers for the Old Testament, but they also appear in the New Testament, and they've got a picture of that. This system includes the word cap, I guess, for chapter, caput. Cap is usually the top, like your head, you get decapitated, get cut off, So it just means chapter. Before each Roman numeral and a reversed pilcrow. That's interesting. Marking the line on which the chapter begins. Recently, Giacomo Cardinelli identified the scribe who wrote the Roman numeral chapter system in Codex Vaticanus as Pedro Chacon of Toledo, Holy Toledo. That's where it comes from Batman, Holy Toledo Batman, who arrived in Rome in 1571 or 1572 and died there in 1581. Some of the chapter numbers, however, may also have been added by Fulvio Orsini, 1529 to 1600. This gives a narrow time frame for the Roman numeral chapters. The Roman numeral chapter numbers as 1571 to 1600. Okay, so that's very interesting. The Roman numeral chapter system primarily runs through the Old Testament, whereas the Arabic numeral system runs through the New Testament. However, there are some 14 places in the New Testament where the chapter is marked with Roman numerals. In 3 places, the reverse pilcrow of the Roman numeral system covers the Arabic numeral, proving that the Roman numeral system is later than the Arabic. Okay, so that's interesting. See figure 17. Since the Roman numerals were recorded 1571 to 1600, the Arabic numerals could not be later than the 16th century. Okay. An example of the dual numbering system can be found on page 1308, where there is an Arabic numeral chapter number in the left margin and a Roman numeral chapter number in the right, both marking the beginning of Luke chapter 3. Although both numerals lack copper, their visual appearance suggests that they were written in different inks using different writing implements. At the same time, the similarity struggling in visual appearance between a chocolate Distigmai on page 1308 and the dots flanking either side of the Arabic numeral is striking. So when let's talk about Arabic numerals, it's not saying that it's, like what you would see, in an Arabic Bible, but it's basically our numbering system, and so we adopted the Arabic numeral system. They've gone out and they asked people on the street, should we adopt the Arabic numeral system? And they're like, no, let's not do that. Everyone's like really Islamophobic and Arabic phobic sort of thing. They're like, don't do that. And it's like, well, that's the system that we use. It's quite interesting. Okay, so let's look at some of these figures. So there's the chocolate Distigmai there, the Arabic numeral chapter number, so a number 3, the Roman numeral chapter number, that's cap for chapter and 3. So that's quite interesting there. In the Greek, usually you would just sort of have a letter like a alpha with a line above it, and that would be a number 1. A gamma would be a number 3 with a line above it. That's what you would see, like in say Stephanus's text. You might see that of these 1550 Textus Receptus. So figure 18, a chocolate Distigmai 1308A11 on the same page as Arabic. Okay, so we've got this chocolate Distigmai, so it's on the same page as this here, and the Roman chapter 3, cap 3. So the numeral chapter numbers marking the beginning of Luke chapter 3. So that's quite interesting. That's all at the beginning of Luke 3 in Vaticanus. The chocolate Distigmai bears a striking visual resemblance to the dots flanking either side of the Arabic numeral 3. So we see these dots here around the Arabic numeral 3. In contrast, the visual appearance of the Arabic and Roman numerals suggests they were written in different inks using different writing implements. The chocolate Distigmai, CU 0.00, Arabic numeral chapter number, CU 0.01, and Roman numeral chapter number, CU 0.02, were all written with inks that were made from chemically cleaned vitriol. So that's interesting. So they're all, I'm guessing that means they're all modern. So all these things would be extras upon Codex Vaticanus. I'm guessing, just going back through here where they're talking about that time period, 1571 to 1600. So we're talking about the time of when they did the Latin the Latin Catholic Bible. So around the time that Theodore Beza, had done his, I guess, third to his fifth edition, around that time. And so a lot of interest in Latin documents, a lot of interest in, even this manuscript, there would have been a lot of interest in this in the Roman Catholic Church. The re-inked theta, so here's a theta here, just like a O with a line in it, of the original scribe, replaced with the supralinear tav by the reinker. So it's got the tav above it, 1308 C21, compared to the apricot Distigmai on the same page. So there's the Distigmai there. That's 1308 B27. The copper to iron ratios of the unreinked theta, Cu 0.35, and the reinker's tav, Cu 0.38, prove they were not written with the same ink as the apricot Distigmai. Okay. So these tests show that it was not the same ink. And so that's interesting. But see, this is where I'm like, Nehemiah Gordon and that team, they have tested some of the original writings to basically, compare them with the Distigmai. But that would mean that they've looked at the chemical composition of the ink in the main text. And so that's where I'm like, man, wouldn't that be something they're able to show, how the age or the chemical makeup of the ink? Because that was part of, archaic mark, and the proving of that being a forgery was the finding of Prussian blue ink. So it meant that it couldn't be older than 1874. And then, they also had found a document which matched perfectly. It was a printed document, so they sort of knew that it was a manuscript written from a printed document. But yeah, I'm sort of in my conspiratorial mind, I'm thinking, was Nehemiah like just sliding his little XRF detector thing over certain parts of that manuscript and go, let's just test this. If they ask any questions, we'll just say, well, we have to match these up, So I'm sure that he knows a little bit more than what is in these articles, because you would probably have to sign certain contracts. He wasn't even allowed to talk about this with me when I interviewed him recently, and so it's interesting. Anyway, it's just a thought. We've got a few comments. Berean says, I believe the manuscript is fake. Does this ink data suggest it's actually fake? No. They're basically saying that the dots in the margin are basically from the Reformation period, post-Reformation period. Revolution, Shalom. So this is Truth Defenders. As you've been speaking, I've read a blog on the subject, Distigmai Revisited, when material analysis catches up with common sense, posted by Tommy Wassam, an interesting subject. Okay, that's interesting. Power of One says, not at 9 p.m. Laughing out loud. Yeah. And so I guess for a lot of Americans, it's like 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. And so I'll just continue through. If I have the comments on and I can see them, I get distracted with them. So I'll read through a bunch more, then I'll go back to the comments. It says here, an apricot Distigmai also on the same page, 3108, can be compared to an unreinked theta on the same page. See figure 19. The reinker changed the orthography of Nazareth in Luke 2:51 by leaving the original scribe's theta reinked and replacing it with the supralinear tav in Nazareth to Nazareth. So that's interesting, because that's the sort of change that you see, the differences between Theodore Beza's 1598 and Scrivener's 1881 Textus Receptus, just these type of, untranslatable, Nazareth or Nazareth. Well, we say Nazareth in English. That's what we say. Payne and Canart's hypothesis that the apricot Distigmai was written with the same ink as the original text was reasonable, given the dichotomy between the light-colored ink of the original scribe and the dark-colored ink of the reinker. The apricot Distigmai is certainly closer in color to the original scribe's theta than it is to the reinker's supralinear tav. This sort of hypothesis is reasonable in real-world scenarios when combined with rigorous paleographical analysis, given that scientific instrumentation is rarely available. However, in this case, no convincing paleographical analysis can be done on the Distigmai, and the XRF results disprove the hypothesis. The re-inked theta has a copper to iron ratio of 0.35, whereas the apricot Distigmai measures at 0.00 and 0.01. So basically, he's saying that this theta, you might come to the conclusion just by looking with your eye that that's the same as ink as these dots, but the chemical composition is almost completely different. And so, surprisingly, the re-inker's Tav, so that's the dark one here, that's the guy who's re-inking it. So this is where it says Nazareth. It used to be Nazareth. It's been changed to Nazareth. Okay. So surprisingly, the re-inker's Tav has a copper value of 0.38, which means that from the perspective of the ratio of copper to iron, it is indistinguishable from the original ink. One could make a stronger case that the re-inker used the same ink as the original scribe, and that either of them used the same ink as the Distigmai. Okay, that's interesting. So I'm sure, I'm just sort of reading through this, trying to say these long scientific words and all the rest of it. And but I'm sure that as we go through, people will pull this apart. They'll look at certain things like that because they're testing this original ink. They're testing the person who's written over it, and they're saying it's the same. It's the same ink, which is quite interesting. And so it says, surprisingly, the re-inker's Tav has a copper value of 0.38, which means that from the perspective of the ratio of copper to iron, it is indistinguishable from the original ink. So that means it's the same. That ink there is the same. Perhaps just going over something. I've often thought, or I actually mentioned this in my previous video, that I guess as you're getting down to the bottom of the inkwell, all the metallic substances would go to the bottom. You'd have to keep stirring it the whole time to get the same colored ink. But if you just actually let it settle and went back over it, so you might actually, this is just a speculation, and just from, looking at lots of Bible videos over the years and all the rest of it, manuscript videos, I guess people with a whole bunch of parchment, they're not going to waste it. They want to make sure that everything fits, everything's perfect. So you might actually go over it with a very light colored ink, and then later on go over it with a dark colored ink to be the definitive, the final writing, because you want to make sure that it all fits on the same page, or that it's flowing, or else you might make the letters a little bit smaller or cramp them in a little bit. And so perhaps that's what's happened here. They've gone through and they're going through, because it's basically saying that this theta is the same ink as the Tav, which is interesting. So that means that they've done this and then they've corrected it with a Tav. But the Distigmai ink doesn't match these. But he says here, surprisingly, it's indistinguishable from the original ink, okay, the Tav. One could make a stronger case that the re-inker used the same ink as the original scribe, than that either of them used the same ink as the Distigmai. So basically it's saying it's a stronger case that these two are linked, that it's probably the original scribe, that he's maybe gone over it with a fine, little I guess, when you're a kid and you're doing, water-based, paints, and it's sort of like almost a see-through type of ink, and then you might go over it with something later. Or just, having a pencil, you might, draw something and you've done it in pencil and then you paint over it. It seems like that's what's happened. And they're basically saying it's a stronger case for that. Neither of these match up with the Distigmai. So the Distigmai are obviously not part of this. So one of the interesting things too is to look at the writing implements as well. So, these Distigmai, they're used, I don't know what they use, whether it's like a piece of bone or a stick or whatever that they're dipping into that inkwell with. But you can tell, when they've gone through and they're using a different type of pen, you can tell what, that they're doing that. And I guess if you were to zoom right in on a microscopic level, you would see the fingerprint of that, because we'll look at it this way. Even there's a guy locally here, he sued Bill Gates. He got 550, I think it was, million. So $500 million. He sued Bill Gates and he won. Now, what he did, his technology, and you probably remember this, back in the day, you would put in your CD-ROM into your computer, and your computer would basically take a picture of your hard drive. Sorry, I'm pretty sure it's of your hard drive. Yeah, that's what the technology was. So it's like your hard drive's got a disk. So it would take a photo, almost like a digital sort of photo, and send that off to Adobe or to Microsoft or whatever. So Microsoft used this technology just to make sure that you don't just use your Microsoft Windows program on 15 computers and you haven't paid for it or whatever. It would tell if it was already used on another computer. And so this technology of basically taking the digital fingerprint of your hard drive, that because every hard drive is different, and even just the way that it's made, it just makes up a digital fingerprint. Just like everything's different. Like if I was to hold up the same object, it might be a piece of plastic. You could tell which factory it was made in just by the certain cuts and things like that if you got right into the forensics of it. And so I guess I'm just saying that this type of technology has been around for years in computers and things like that. Just zooming right in, having a digital fingerprint of a scan of your hard drive disk, and then sending that off to Microsoft. They used that technology for years and years, and then they had to give this guy $500 million for stealing it off him. But yeah, the concept of knowing, because even just in an artist's work, when they're using a certain brush, you can tell when they've used a thick brush, a thin brush, sometimes you can tell what sort of material that brush would be made of, because there's only a certain amount of materials. There might be 100 different materials that are commonly used, but you can sort of go, well, in this era they were mostly using horse hair, pig's hair, whatever. So you can go through and you can zoom in and look at how this has affected the writing. So it's quite interesting, and I enjoy this type of thing. It's very fascinating to me. And so let's go to the next page. So we see here's an apricot Distigmai there. Here's a chocolate Distigmai here. And there's a table of contents with a vita in with a line above it, which would be equivalent to like a chapter 2. That's what I'm imagining. Figure 20, the apricot Distigmai and chocolate Distigmai compared to the table of contents, all three have the same elemental profile characterized by a near lack of metallic impurities. So it seems that these they're not identical, well, this has CU 0.01, the other one has 0.00, and the other one has 0.01. But you can see this one's very dark. But so I'm guessing that it's just basically because around that time, just before 1600, they were using very similar inks everywhere. So I guess it would have been, the amount of writing in those days, they would have started mass producing inks and having a very similar chemical compound. So very interesting. So Codex Vaticanus table of contents on a flyleaf 3. Like the Roman numerals, Cardinali also identified the handwriting of the first column of the table of contents as being that of Chacon, which means that it was written in Rome sometime between 1571 and 1581. The table of contents was written in an ink that is visually distinct from that of the Distigmai, with that it seems to have been a different writing implement. See figure 20. Okay, so I think that's figure 20. Yeah, that is. So yeah, you can see the Distigmai here is a bit blobby, and this looks a lot sharper, looks a lot darker as well. I guess the writing implement could make a difference in color, because if you've got it a lot sharper, the ink would pool in a smaller area, where if it's spread out, it might sort of fan out a little bit and become lighter. That's my theory. I'm just throwing this in as I go. The table of contents was written in an ink that is virtually distinct from that of the Distigmai. Is visually distinct. Okay, I said virtually. Visually distinct from that of the Distigmai, with what seems to have been a different writing implement. Despite this, the ink of the table of contents has the same near lack of metallic impurities as the Distigmai, with a copper to iron ratio of 0.01. An interesting contrast to the table of contents on flyleaf 3 is the canon of biblical books according to Jerome on the recto of the same leaf. See figure 21. So I guess that's the next page. Yeah, figure 21. Okay, so that'll be interesting to look at. And I'm pretty sure Rome, Jerome had written out a list of biblical books. He'd also written out a list of apocryphal books, but put an asterisk next to them, basically sort of questioning their authenticity. That's what I've heard anyway. So these guys had a table of contents. It had the canon of biblical books according to Jerome on the recto of the same leaf. Daniel Biacconi recently argued convincingly that Cardinal Bessarion, 1408 to 1479, was the scribe who added the Jeromean canon to Codex Vaticanus. So that's interesting. So Bessarion, I recently talked about him, or a few months ago, in the Byzantine school. So Bessarion had collected lots of manuscripts. There is actually a Bessarion library in Venice. So my argument was, why wouldn't Erasmus, who was living there, Aldus Manutius, he would have wanted to have a look at these. It's sort of like historians who usually critical text historians are sort of like, no, they didn't look at them. They didn't look at the manuscripts that he had. And I think he had like 300 biblical manuscripts. So it's quite a collection. And so he was a very interesting guy pre-Erasmus. So look, he died in 1472. He was contemporary with Lorenzo Valla. And so he was a very interesting guy to look at. So they're saying apparently he put in these these canon, this list of, basically it's like if you go to the front of a Bible, here I've got the New King James 1979 edition, and if you go to the front of the Bible, just has a basic table of contents. That's all it is. And so you just see Matthew, Mark, Luke, what page it's on, etc. But there was just a list of these names of the books. So this Daniel Biacconi has argued convincingly that this was Bessarion. So the first time Codex Vaticanus comes up on the radar in the Vatican Library, I think it was 1478. It was around that time. It was around the time that Bessarion sort of died. So, I mean, it could have been him who did it. I guess I'll have to, check that out. But that's a very interesting thing to think about. And it looks like, there's certain articles written about that. But yeah, I just thought I'd stop there and talk about who Cardinal Bessarion was, because he was a very interesting character. The ink of Bessarion's Jeromean canon had a copper to iron ratio of 1.00 to 1.18, meaning that it has as much or more copper as iron. See Table 7. Theoretically, Bessarion could have added the Jeromean canon in Byzantium, but it is more likely that he did so after the manuscript came into his custody in Italy. So they're saying because he was like one of the main scholars in, say, like the Council of Florence. Was it the Council of Florence? I'm pretty sure it was. But he was one of the main scholars in Rome before the fall of Constantinople. So Constantinople fell in 1453. So it's around the time that printing started. So it's easy to sort of link those two together. And so he was quite active in the church, quite active with languages, manuscripts, etc. And I'm pretty sure Bessarion was originally from Constantinople. Correct me if I'm wrong. I could be wrong on that. But so they're saying that they might have actually changed it. He might have actually changed it underneath the Byzantine era. But then they're saying that maybe after it came into his custody in Italy. So I'm not really sure. I didn't know that he was a custodian of this manuscript. I don't know that, so I've got to educate myself on that. The ink in the main text of the 15th century minuscule replacement pages has a copper to iron ratio of 0.49 to 0.58. See Table 7. Thus, the 15th century Jeromean canon and the 15th century minuscule replacement pages were written in inks that were not chemically purified. So I guess these are older inks. They're much different to what was used later on in the Distigmai and the the Arabic numeral chapter numbering and things like that. I guess they put vitriol or something in it, and it just changes the chemical makeup of it. In contrast, a 16th century Arabic numeral chapter numbers, the table of contents, 1571 to 1581, and the Roman numeral chapter numbers 1571 to 1600 were written in inks that were chemically purified. The Distigmai distinctly belong to the chemically purified inks. So that's interesting. So when you test the table of contents, that looks like it's from Jerome, perhaps written by Bessarion. When you test that, it's like 1.00. These other ones are like 0.01. So that you can clearly tell that they are not the same. As already mentioned, Nickham pointed to the Distigmai on one of the minuscule replacement pages, 1519, as evidence that all Distigmai were added in the 15th century or later. Payne's counter-argument was that the Distigmai on the replacement pages could have been copied from a deteriorated original page when the minuscule replacement pages were first produced. However, the XRF tests prove that the ink of the Distigmai on one of the minuscule replacement pages, CU 0.01 and to 0.02, is completely different from the main text on the replacement pages, CU 0.49 to 0.58. The replacement pages were written with ink that was not chemically purified, whereas the Distigmai included one of the replacement pages. Whereas all the Distigmai, including one of the replacement pages, were written with ink that was chemically purified. Okay, so what they're saying is there are replacement pages in Codex Vaticanus, like it has, I think it ends in Hebrews, but then it continues on and has like Revelation, but those pages are not original, they're written in later. So the chemical compound is not the same as like the dots. So just to put it in layman's terms, these two different types of ink, unpurified versus purified, might reflect a transition from making inks out of vitriol that was not chemically purified in the 15th century to vitriol that was purified in the 16th century. Okay, so basically, the time of Bessarion, they were using inks that didn't have vitriol in it. Later on, they were using inks with vitriol in it, and this is how they can say, well, it's hardly got any copper or these other elements in it. So it's got a footnote here. To be precise, the vitriolic solution from which the vitriol used to make the ink was extracted was chemically purified. To be precise, the vitriolic solution from which the vitriol used to make the ink was extracted was chemically purified. I think it's missing a comma there. But let's go down here. So here's the Jeromean canon. So he's listed Bible books. There's a replacement page, the main text. So we see the replacement page is basically written in like a modern Greek, in a sense of, in the original Koine period, it's in capitals. Here we have it in like a Byzantine sort of era text. And then we have a replacement page with a Distigmai. So they wanted to test these as well, because even on the replacement pages that they know are probably around from the Council of Florence or something like that, around that era, I'm not really sure. I'm not sure if these guys would agree with me, but they do have this Distigmai ink dots there as well. So they wanted to test and see if that's the same as the replacement. So the Jeromean canon, flyleaf IV 12, compared to the main text on a minuscule replacement page, 1519A4, and a Distigmai also on a minuscule replacement page, 1519A12LM. So I think I've got that correct. So here's a list of books of the Bible from, someone's copied that from Jerome's canon. Then we've got a replacement page, where the pages have fallen off and things like that. So they've got a replacement page there. It's written in the Byzantine era in 1400 or something, 1500, around between those sort of dates, could be a little bit earlier. But we do see the dots here as well. So they're testing all three of these to see if they're all, a similar person or similar inks, etc. So the Jeromean canon has more copper than iron. The replacement page has more copper than any of the original inks or the re-inking, but only half of that of the Jeromean canon, and the Distigmai is devoid of copper. So when we look at these, it's got 1.12 here. This has 0.58 here, and this has 0.0 or 0.01, which matches in with all the other Distigmai throughout the text. So these look old. They look like they're before the vitriol was added. This has got double the amount of CU. This has about half of that, but this is almost like 0, 0.00, 0.01. The Distigmai on the replacement page was not written in the same ink as the main text on the replacement page. So you would assume, okay, here we go. That looks like it's part of that. It's to the eye, it's very similar, but these are much more modern. Okay, so it could be 200 years later, sort of thing, or 100 years. 200 years later. So here we have Table 7, the results of the XRF tests on the 15th and 16th century scribal features. So the Canon of Jerome, perhaps written by Bessarion, looking at 15th century. So let's just say, 1440 or 1439, just for a nice controversial number. And then it gives you the chemical makeup of that, the Cu and the Zn. And so we see that's got quite a lot there. So it's in the ones, it's in, and then the Zn has 0.19, 0.22, and 0.21. And then as you go down, like these ones here, which are later replacement texts, you see that the chemical makeup is quite different with the, I'm pretty sure the Zn is zinc. I've forgotten what it was earlier, but when we look here, it's about half. So we see that these ones here are written with a heavy metallic base. These have about half of that with the first elements, but when it comes to this element here, it's almost completely gone. And then when you get to the Arabic numerals later on, it's almost nothing because of the vitriol and things like that. So the Arabic numerals and the table of contents and the Roman numerals, these all basically prove that they come from this period of time. So they've got 16th century here. So we're looking at after 1571, most probably. Well, actually, it just says 16th century. So I guess they're 1571, these ones here. So this one here, the Arabic numerals, that could have been beforehand. They probably did mention that, and I read over it, but I've forgotten. So, but that's a very interesting page to look at and very interesting numbers. So then we're going to the conclusions. So I need a sip of coffee. Okay, we got comments. Let's have a look. Power of One coffee. The Power of One is in Western Australia. Okay, very interesting. I've been to Perth, I think, about 10 times. Beautiful place. Been to Geraldton. Nice city. Lots of Christians there. It's amazing. Follow in Truth LJ says peace at Power of One and Nick. Flute whistle class in session. Hey LJ and Pooh. Following Truth LJ, yes, but that list recording Vaticanus in the Vatican is not an original. Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that. I thought it was like an original type of thing. That's something to look into. Hello LJ, good to see you. Following Truth LJ, it's a copy, which means the Vaticanus manuscript could have been added to make it seem like it was there at that time. Yeah, well, that's interesting because it's like the with the Moratorian fragment, and people date that to 170, and it's got a list of canonical books. And when you look it up, it's like, oh, it's 170. You know, they must have this old document like a papyri with this list. But when you look, it's like the oldest list of that is like 800 years later. It's like, because I'm all for having things on our side on Christianity and old things and all the rest of it, but I don't want to sort of trick people into thinking that we've got things older than we really do, because I think the truth will just defend us no matter what. But we've got to be honest about the findings. And so I don't think people are being dishonest, but they're just sort of saying, well, it goes back to 170. And it's like, okay, well, it goes back to 170. But when you follow that paper trail, you're like, you're sort of left going, that's interesting, So anyway, I'm going to read through these conclusions and acknowledgements. So we're nearly finished. And then I guess I'll just open it up to just a general discussion about Vaticanus and these issues. Maybe I can even zip over to Tommy Wasserman's article that was mentioned earlier by someone. So this study builds on the pioneering work of Philip Payne, who discovered the Distigmai in Codex Vaticanus nearly 30 years ago and recognized their text-critical function. It also continues the legacy of Paul Kennard, who carried out paleographical observations of Codex Vaticanus at the end of the last century using innovative magnification techniques. Some 20 years ago, Patrick Andrus warned about relying solely on the color of the Distigmai to prove their antiquity, as a visual resemblance is no guarantee of identity. A spectrometric analysis of the ink would perhaps clarify this question. Some 15 years ago, Payne himself noted a similar caution when he wrote, "Confirmation awaits scientific testing, such as multispectral imaging or X-ray fluorescence imaging. Micro X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy has now proven all the Distigmai tested, drumroll, both apricot and chocolate, were written in chemically purified inks typical of the 16th century or later." Okay. Despite appearances, the apricot Distigmai tested were not written in the same ink as the original main text or original horizontal lines, paragraphoi. Okay, so they're saying it's modern. It's from the Reformation era, around the time that the Catholic Church were doing their definitive editions of the Latin, around the time Theodore Beza, around that age, just before the King James, and so that's where the Distigmai come from. So that's, drum roll, that's it. But the more that I read through this, the more I'm like, but they would have tested the original inks. That's interesting. What's in these original inks, and I guess comparing them to older manuscripts and things like that, because this wouldn't be the only thing they tested. I was looking on the website of the Bodleian Library, and they have a ton of Quranic manuscripts, Arabic manuscripts, etc. And they've tested like the parchments of these, of the oldest one. I don't think they've tested the inks, but they've gone through and tested some of these things, scientifically over the years, and certain aspects of it. And I'm like, why can't they just do that for Vaticanus and Sinaiticus? But I think maybe Nehemiah Gordon has actually done this. Maybe he's discovered that it's, a 12th century document or something like that. I mean, it wouldn't take much for him to just slip his little machine over and test a few other little bits and pieces around that manuscript. If they're comparing these dots to certain writings, like to the replacement pages, but maybe those answers are actually already in here, and we're not seeing the forest through the trees yet, because we're just sort of discovering this and we're just going through it, and it's like maybe there's enough information here for us to go, okay, that they do test this replacement ink and the ink underneath, and it's got these type of chemical compounds in it, and then we can go through and look and see when these compounds are in manuscripts. But see, the amazing thing is it's a bit like the 9/11 story, with Tower 7. Now, when that collapsed, no steel structure like that had ever just collapsed, free fallen collapse, from office fires, But instead of going, well, that's an aberration, they actually changed the science to say, well, it can happen, and it's like, oh my gosh, And so what we see with this type of thing is, sometimes they'll go, well, we know that back in 360 they used this type of ink. Why? Well, because Codex Vaticanus has it. Instead of going, it's sort of like a circular reasoning. But anyway, I'm waffling on. Micro X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy has now proven that all Distigmai tested, both apricot and chocolate, were written in chemically purified inks, typical of the 16th century or later. Despite appearances, the apricot Distigmai tested were not written in the same ink as the original main text or original horizontal lines, the paragraphi. Any similarity in color between the ink of the apricot Distigmai and the original ink is purely coincidental and entirely superficial, and therefore can no longer be cited as evidence for an early date of the Distigmai. Similarly, the chocolate Distigmai and the re-inking of the main text utilized radically different inks, and hence any similarity in appearance is also pure coincidence. The strongest argument for a date was always the existence of Distigmai on the 15th century minuscule replacement pages. So, the pages that were written, only, say 100 years or 200 years before Erasmus sort of thing. These replacement pages were, because they had Distigmai on them as well, to test those Distigmai, you could say, well, is that modern? Is it old, from the 14th century, 15th century? Where's it from? The counter argument was that these Distigmai were copied from a damaged original page as part of the original production of the replacement pages. However, the ink of the Distigmai tested on one of the replacement pages is identical to that of all the other Distigmai, apricot and chocolate, and entirely dissimilar from that of the main text on the replacement pages. Hence, the Distigmai on the replacement pages are not part of the original production of these pages, but rather a paratextual element added later along with all the other Distigmai. So, it sort of proves that it's these could not have been part of the original document. Finally, this study should serve as a warning about reaching definitive paleographical and codicological conclusions. How's that for a sentence? Paleographical or codicological conclusions based on visual appraisal of the color of ink alone. I guess that's the thing. It's like you come up with a conclusion because until you test it like this, you don't know. And that's what I'm saying about Sinaiticus, Vatican. They're like, well, it's old because the ink's this and that. And it's like, well, you got to test it. There we go. That proves our case. You can't just go by what you're seeing with the naked eye. You got to test these things. People from both sides have been not hoodwinked, but have been guided to say, well, this is old, or this is new, or this is from the Reformation, or it's from the original, and they're not sure until they do this type of work. Then they're like, okay, it's settled. So why wouldn't they do that with Sinaiticus? Why wouldn't they do that with the main text instead of just the marginalia? Acknowledgements. Our sincere thanks to the Bibliotheca Apostolica Vaticana and the generous cooperation of its staff, with whom we could not have done this research, especially Don Moro Mantovani, Monsignor Cesare Passini, and so there's a bunch of names there. I won't go through them because I'll just say them wrong. We also wish to thank these other people. So Thanks to all those guys for their tireless assistance and cooperation. Our thanks to the editor of this journal, Andreas Nemeth, for his assistance and encouragement in carrying out the research. We also want to thank Philip Payne and Jesse Grans for their invaluable assistance. This research was carried out with partial funding from the Institute for Hebrew Bible Manuscript Research, ihbmr.com. So authors contributions: Nehemiah Gordon defined the corpus of the study and formulated the questions of the study, conducted imaging of the Codex using Dino light microscopy, chose the spots to be checked with the XRF, and wrote the first draft of the manuscript. Now, I don't think it was coincidental that he checked certain places like the Lord's Prayer, Luke 3. I think these would have been strategic places that he wanted to test. And I guess that will come out later on, because what you'll see with Nehemiah Gordon, he'll test Hebrew documents in the Vatican and read them, and then it's like 5 years later he brings out why he specifically went to the book of Revelation in Hebrew or whatever. So it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of this. Oliver Hahn conducted some of the XRF measurements and reviewed the manuscript. Nelson Calvillo carried out quality control of the data and reviewed the manuscript. Ira Rabin carried out the XRF measurements, processed the results of the XRF measurement data, wrote the sections on microscopic reflectography and micro X-ray fluorescence and XRF raw spectra, and reviewed the manuscript. Patrick Andrus helped define the corpus of the study, defined some research questions, and reviewed the manuscript in depth. Pavlos Vassiliadis helped define the research questions, contributed some philological observations, and reviewed the manuscript. 2 lectures with some preliminary findings from this study were presented by Nehemiah Gordon and Ira Rabin, respectively, at the Society of Biblical Literature annual meeting in San Antonio, November 21st in 2023. And so then we've got a bibliography just going through. So that looks like the one who was saying it was from Bessarion. So I might actually just quickly look for that, but it looks like it might be in Italian. Let's have a quick look. Okay, yes. Vatican Library, yeah, looks like it's in Italian. I have to pay 15 euros to get that one. What's this one? Tarossa, 11 euros. Okay. So it's an ebook. And some of these people, they put their findings online. You have to buy it for like 5 years, and then they shut it down, or they make it public domain after that. That's just the way that they make their money, I guess. Okay, I seem to have found... No, that's not the document. And it's all in Italian, so that's not going to help. Okay, so I'll shut that down. Now I'll try to... I'll actually finish this. So for a summary of these SBL lectures, see Wasserman 2023. Okay, a bunch of people here. Interesting group of people. There we go. That's the end of that article. So I'll shut that down. Now I'll search for Tommy Wasserman. I'll just go to the ETC blog and I'll see if there's anything new there. Distigmai. Here we go. That is a new article. So this is by Peter Head. Okay. That's the article that I've just read through here. But maybe, just maybe, there are other ones written. A new major article on the Distigmai of Codex Vaticanus. Recent comments. Stephen Avery. So I might. Oh, here we go. So I'm not sure if it's. I guess that there is one by Tommy Wasserman. But that seems like it's in 2023. So if anyone in the comments can guide me, I'm just looking at who said that. Truth Defender says Revolution Shalom. So it looks like, okay, so Truth Defenders must be, oh, I guess saying Shalom doesn't mean you're Hebrew. Many Christians say that. As you've been speaking, I read a blog on the subject. Okay, Distigmai Revisited. Okay, so I'll look that one up. It might be a 2023 article. Distigmai Revisited Wasserman. Yeah, that's the 2023 article, but I'll get it up anyway. So this is before these findings because they're only just come out in the last month or so. But when material analysis catches up with common sense. So that would be, I guess, a good one to read to see the issues that were brought forth. And, then go through and read the latest stuff. So that would probably tell you all the ins and outs of, the good, the bad, and the ugly of what people were saying about that. So I'm going to read through this one. I don't think it goes for long, but I'll make it a little bit bigger. A major new article on the Distigmai in Codex Vaticanus by Peter M. Head. Just in time for Christmas, Nehemiah Gordon, Patrick Andrist, Oliver Hahn, and a bunch of other guys. I don't want to just skip over them because they're unimportant. It's just because I'm bad at saying names, especially when there's Hebrew. Like most people would say Nehemiah, but just because I know it's Nehemiah because I've interviewed him. Abstract, 4th century Greek Bible manuscript, Codex Vaticanus B, Vatican GR 1209, contains pairs of horizontally aligned marginal dots known as distigmai, which correspond to textual variants in other manuscripts. The production of the distigmai has been variously dated to the 4th or to the 16th century. So that's what I'm saying. People who have credibility, people who know their stuff, some of us saying it's the 4th century, some are saying 16th century, like Byzantine scholars who would have respect from Tommy Wasserman and Peter Head and these other guys. They're saying, these are original, these are 4th century. Others are saying, no, they're 16th century. And of course, whatever your presupposition is, you're going to gravitate towards whatever camp. If you're not into the Byzantine text, you're going to go with the 16th century ones, until you test these, you can't tell. This is why we're always saying test Sinaiticus, test all these manuscripts. It would be great if people could test Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, but it just makes me wonder whether Nehemiah Gordon did, test this sort of on the side. I'm not sure how much freedom he had with those manuscripts. A 4th century date would prove the early existence of hundreds of variants. All you have to do is look at the early church writers. They got all these variants there anyway. And the papyri, there's so many Byzantine readings in the papyri. Read Harry Sturz's book, but that's old now. We're looking at, I think it was the 80s that he wrote that. Many of which are otherwise only witnessed by later manuscripts. Sometimes it's only manuscripts that we can look at. Well, what about early church writers' quotations? What about Latin? What about looking at versions and things like that out inside the closed class of witnesses of Greek and Latin and early church writers? What about outside of that? Syriac, etc. Near infrared microscope reflectography combined with micro X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy proved that the Distigmai, both those categorized as apricot, which are visually similar to the ink in the original main text, and chocolate, which are very similar to the re-inking of the main text, which were written with inks made from chemically purified vitriol, a process that only became standard in the 16th century. As a result, there is no reasonable chance that the Distigmai were written in the 4th century. Horizontal lines that have been hypothesized to function as text, critical, obloi, were written in the same ink as the original main text, which differs completely from that of the Distigmai. In other words, the Distigmai and horizontal lines tested were not produced during the same writing session and are separated by more than 1,000. So, no. See, that's the thing. It's like they're drawing that conclusion because they've already dated it to this. So what we've done, we've proven that the Distigmai are from the 16th century. That's great. Yes, people had thought that was the case. Some people thought, well, perhaps if they are, like what I found within the King James community, like say the Textus Receptus Bibles, Textus Receptus Bibles, if we look at his website, he does talk about these issues, and he has his own type of presupposition. And this is written probably about, I guess, 10 years ago now, because he still has my 2016 edition on there. And so a lot of these articles are written before then. Okay, here we go. Maybe it's here. Textus Receptus. Read more. Now, while that's loading up, I'll finish this. As a result, there is no reasonable chance. Oh, actually, I did say that. In other words, the Distigmai and horizontal lines tested were not produced during the same writing session. Agreed. And are separated by more than no one knows. That's the thing. These guys are just jumping to this conclusion that it has been proven to be a 4th century manuscript. That's where we're saying we'll test everything, then you'll know. Making it impossible for them to have functioned as co-joining text critical symbols in the 4th century. Because some people have looked at this manuscript and said it's 6th century, some 9th century. So anyway, I might go through some of the comments on that. So let's look through this. Westcott and Hort theory. Okay, critical text symbols in Codex Vaticanus. So this is a popular thing. You know, people are pointing to these dots. This is where the Comma Johanneum is missing in Vaticanus. And so I'll just quickly read through this. So this is quite a common position for people to have. So which everyone who's ever had an opinion on this will now have to deal with this information. Codex Vaticanus contains 850 textual markers, which in 1995 were discovered to be markers for textual variants. The textual markers look like amulets, double dots. The Vatican itself has identified many of these dots as being part of the original document. So that's until recently. To understand the importance of this discovery, you must understand that it is the variants in the verses of the text that distinguish the Byzantine text from the Alexandrian text. For the past 22 years, scholars have argued over the dots, with some trying to claim that the marker must have been added at a later date. The reason for the skepticism is self-evident when you consider the implications. Many of these dots point to variants which only exist in the Byzantine text, the text behind the Textus Receptus. There are also dots next to the comma in 1 John 5:7-8. That means Byzantine text would have predated the Codex Vaticanus. Many critical text scholars have argued that these textual markers against these textual markers for years, but have failed to find a way to refute the evidence that points to the Byzantine text's existence before the Alexandrian text. So that's the thing, if they visually look like they were from the same pen. But see, what this does, it's not so much, a death to TR people saying, hey, you got dots here. What it is us using the same type of principles that have been used by critical text people by just visually looking at something and saying, well, that's this old because of this reason. Until you chemically test it, you don't know. And that's what we're saying. Chemically test all these. Show us how old these things are. Don't just make these claims like, there's 1,000-year gap now between these dots and the making of the manuscript. It's like, you just got to, you haven't tested that side of it, or perhaps it has been tested and no one's saying anything. But anyway, I'll read through this. So this is probably 10 years old now, but this was from I'm just showing you one example of the Textus Receptus type of Byzantine majority text side. The original paper on the discovery of these text critical marks can be read here. So Vaticanus text critical symbol. So I won't go there. Are text critical markers a phenomenon only found in Codex Vaticanus? Nobody had previously asked the question of where the textual variants had been marked in earlier manuscripts until they were found in Codex Vaticanus. Nobody had bothered to look or understand. Once people started looking, the results were astounding, to say the least. It was soon found that 4th century Hixson Codex Colberto Saravianus LXXG contained dot markers in its margins that corresponded closely to the shape and location of the dot markers of Vaticanus. The markers of Codex Colberto Saravianus are similar enough to Vaticanus that one has to wonder if they have come from the same scriptorium. Although the Septuagint is the Greek version of the Hebrew Bible Old Testament, its production dates from the same time period. This pattern follows the established use by Origen in the midst of the LXXG body text, proving that both were part of the original production of the LXXG. There is no dispute that these dot markers, I won't read through the rest of that, but I think you get the gist. That's all I'm saying. When I first started looking into this number of years ago, I asked Professor, he says Bart Ehrman, on his Facebook page, what was the status of these dot markings in Vaticanus. Like most critical text people, he was very non-committal and said scholars were still discussing the matter. What this meant to me and now is that they have not found a way to refute these implications of these textual variant markings. And so that gives you the perspective of from a Byzantine text guy or a guy who favors the Textus Receptus. People were looking at these arguments going, well, if you've got dots that are 4th century, that proves that these readings were known to that time. So that's been one of the arguments. And so it hasn't just been TR people, it's been Byzantine guys, looking at this as well and fascinated by this. But a lot of people in the TR camp and Byzantine camp are like, well, until we test these manuscripts, you can't know. And that's always been my position. Like I've been there sitting with James Snap Jr., sitting with Stephen Avery, and they're talking about all the things of Simonides and talking about, how old Sinaiticus is, a different issue. But I'm like, well, you take, both of these guys are taking it by faith in a sense where until it is chemically tested, they, like one has enough evidence for themselves to say, I think it's 1839. And I tend to gravitate more toward that. But that's just a presupposition. It's not, I'm not basing that on actual evidence in a sense where I don't have enough evidence to make a conclusion. I don't feel I have enough evidence. Some people feel that that is enough evidence for them. I don't feel it's enough evidence for me. But I am skeptical that this thing is so old. But that's my presupposition. Until they test these manuscripts, we just don't know. That's why I'm all in favor for this type of work. And I would hope that Nehemiah Gordon would go through and test the actual document age. And it seems strange that they're only testing these dots. It wouldn't take much just to go, okay, let's look at the actual document. Let's look at these inks. But I think maybe he actually puts those answers in there. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this pans out with people in the TR Academy, people who are looking at this issue, like Jeff Riddle and many of the people who are involved with his side of things, because some of these guys they can read through that article and understand everything that's being said. I'm reading these words going, I have no idea what they're talking about. But I guess as the years go by, we will understand what's being said. And as more and more people examine the findings, I think it's going to be very enlightening to us. I think that by testing these, we've got our leg in the door. And we're like, hang on, I think there's enough information here for us to go. They were testing some of these original inks and some of the ink that was over the top, and they're telling us what the chemical compound is, that how much metal is in there. Is that a standard for that era? How does that compare with, something in Sinaiticus? But we don't know with Sinaiticus. So how does that compare with something tested of that age? Is there anything tested that's 4th century? Do we know? Sort of thing. So I think inadvertently this has opened up a whole can of worms. It's quite interesting. So maybe I'll just do a quick search for Distigmai in Codex Vaticanus on Google. Maybe. So yeah, this is the one that I want everyone to jump onto. So this is going to premiere in 11 hours. So talking about the dots. So this is new research. So this is Dwayne Green and Heffin Jones. So I recommend people go there. Okay, so I might pull that off the screen just so I can search a little bit more discreetly. Okay, the Distigmai. Maybe I need to write 2024. Variant readings, new work on Codex Vaticanus. Okay, so this is a blog. Brent Nongbury, so he's quite famous. He's got a little bit to say here, so I might read through that. It doesn't say, oh yeah, it's copyrighted. Okay, I think, well, it just says unauthorized use and duplication of this material without written permission from this site's author is prohibited. Okay, so I don't think I'm allowed to do that. Let me just go through and see if there's anything I can just summarize. Okay, so he's glad that they've done this. They've tested the inks. Nehemiah Gordon's article. So yeah, they've dated these dots to the 16th century. The history of Codex Vaticanus and New Testament textual scholarship it's in a book, so I guess there's more findings. Okay, so yeah, and then he's got a link to Codex Vaticanus to check it all out. But apparently this is from the Vatican Library, so observation of the original scribes. So that would be an interesting one to go through, but I'm pretty sure that would be copyrighted as well. All rights reserved. The contents, you have to get permission from the Vatican Library. So, but I will throw that link here. And so anyone can just sort of copy that and go through that and read that for themselves. and also the Brent Nonbury article. I'll throw that link in there as well. And I'll just check for any more. Distigmai, ResearchGate. Okay, so there is a bit of activity on the ETC Facebook, so I might see there's any comments. Sometimes it's strange. You'll go through the internet and you'll just find some random thing on a Yahoo group. I guess most of them are gone now, or Twitter, and it's just the most profound little comment. And so you get these scholars who are just following things, and they're like, "Well, what about this?" And it just changes your whole perspective. So that's sort of what I'm looking for. Okay, so the Evangelical Textual Criticism, they put their article up there, but it's just got 3 likes, and that's it. So, but Jeff Riddle, he mentions this, so I might put this up here. Below, okay. So he's talking about basically the same article. These findings illustrate the failure of much of the modern reconstruction method of textual criticism. How many misguided conclusions in modern textual criticism using the assured results of scholarship have been based on such faulty data? So this is the thing. It's not just, guys with an opinion on the internet. Kosher scholars, Christian scholars, people, Catholics, atheists, people have all speculated about the age of these, and a lot of these people are being wrong. And at the end of the day, it's like they still haven't proven that these dots are 4th century. So they've proven that, the manuscript 4th century, I should say. They've proven that the dots are, from around about the age of the Reformation, but they're saying, the text is 4th century. They still haven't proven that or disproven it. And so, I think what Jeff Riddle's got to say here is very true. It doesn't seem like there's much else to this. Okay, so that's on the 20th. So he's just put his own little comment there. But apart from that, ink, that will be variant readings. Okay, so that's the Brent Nonbury article again. Okay, that's on his page again. Okay, let's have a look. Further, Vaticanus, Distigmai obelisk symbols, 2017 by Payne. Sometimes Wikipedia, that people love to grab this material and go and summarize it on Wikipedia. So let's just throw it up here. Maybe I can. Yep, they're all open. So let's have a look at this. Distigmai. Here we go. So it doesn't seem like they've updated their links there. But let's have a look distinctively. Okay, the Distigmai. Okay, so doesn't seem like they have all that updated information there, because it's quite a complex thing. Distinguish, distinctive, Distigmai. Yeah, so it looks like that needs updating. That's cool. That'll come in time. What else have they got? Philip Payne, 2024. So that would be interesting coming from him, because he was thanked. The 51 Distigmai matching the apricot color. Okay, so that's in January 2010. So that's not going to help us. That's old school. Paragraphos, not obolos, in Codex Vaticanus. Okay, so that's Jan Krohn. So he's writing about this. Paragraphos, not obolos, in Codex Vaticanus. Okay. That's published in 2019. So that's the push against pain there. Interesting. Because some of these 2024 articles, it comes up with 2024, but that's the website down the bottom saying that that's the date. Peter Gurry. Okay, Peter Gurry's blog. It seems like he might write about this. Okay, so that's the same one as the ETC blog. View more on Peter Gurry's website. Okay, and then it goes to the ETC, this same article here. So I think that's about it. Now, if anyone wants to talk about this, chat about it, if you know about stuff, don't just jump on and want to talk about, the rapture or once saved, always saved or something. I specifically want to talk about this, and I want these videos to remain on these issues, because or else would people jump onto these and they want to learn about these type of things, and then we travel off into 15 different areas, and some of these videos are designed to sit on the internet so that later on, if people want to know about things, I can point them to these two videos, and they can go through them and go, okay, well, they're reading through it. It's getting read for them, because some people don't like to read long-winded articles, and so having it read to them, or even just them putting their headphones and just listening to it, they can get the gist, and then they don't have to spend their time doing that. They can listen in the car or at work or whatever. So I'm putting the StreamYard link there. If anyone wants to jump on and talk about this specific issue of Codex Vaticanus and the Distigmai, that'd be great. If you want to talk about the rapture, once saved, always saved, or anything else, just that'll be another time. Okay, so I'm going to start shutting some of these down. Okay, ink variants. That one, we'll shut that down. Facebook, don't need that. Jeff Riddle, we do not need that. And here is the Wikipedia article on Codex Vaticanus. And here's the document here. And I was a little bit embarrassed the other day. I saw a picture of Codex Vaticanus, and I wasn't sure if it had 3 columns or 4 columns, where I should really know that just by looking at it. So this is, looks like it's from the book of Hebrews. Okay. Yeah, the ending of 2 Thessalonians and beginning of Hebrews. Interesting. So Heffen Jones is saying hello for a moment. So Heffen's usually a busy guy there in the Philippines. He's got a million things going on. And so Heffen is going to be with Dwayne Green tomorrow in about 11 hours. So I recommend people tune into that. So it's about 10 o'clock Australian time, which I'm not sure what that is American time. It's probably just in the evening. But yeah, I would recommend people do that. Okay, so Heffen says he might be popping in. I have family in Luzon, Heffen. Okay. Luzon, I'm guessing Luzon is in the Philippines. Luzon. Yeah, if you do want to pop in, Heffen, I mean, you don't have to stay for long. You can pop your head in. But yeah, if there's anything you want to talk about with this issue, no doubt this is something that you are very fascinated in and interested in. And so if you do feel like you want to jump in and say a few things, go for it. I'm basically like, it's 11 at night here. I could go till 12. I could go to 11:30, whatever, or I could just go for 10 minutes more. But yeah. So yeah, Luzon. I'm just looking at Luzon here. Interesting place. Nice. Luzon. Might look at that on maps. I really like maps on Google. Google Maps is just incredible. It's so helpful. When I was in Pakistan, we were using Google Maps to direct us to go from place to place. Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so Luzon's quite a big section. It's the main capital of Manila is there. I know Cebu, which I guess is way down. Oh, there's Davao. I actually thought Davao was on this side, but okay. So Heffin Jones says he's not going to say much more now, or even in Dwayne's YouTube that I said back in our interview in September with you. Just know that just now we know that Nehemiah has concluded. Yeah. Okay. So that's I guess Nehemiah said that's the conclusions that I've come to, and that's it. So I guess later on people will question Nehemiah, because I think he said that this is coming out, but there's sort of more to come. So until that that really comes out, we can't really speculate about what else he's talked about, and so what else he's realized as the results of his time in the Vatican. Heffin says, yes, there is more to come. Yes. So that's going to be interesting. Now, I know I went to Bacolod. I was in Ilo City back, I think, in 2003, preaching there. I preached also in Bacolod City. There was quite a lot of activity in Bacolod. They were killing like a political representative every day for a while there to get what they wanted. So there's quite a lot of activity. There's Cebu City. So I've got some friends from Cebu. They recently just moved to America. I've got some very good friends in Davao City. So yeah, amazing place. If you don't know about the Philippines, Philippines is a great place to go and visit. The vast majority of people do speak English. If you go into the remote areas, of course, it could be different. But if you go to Manila, if you go to Ilo City, I mean, I was preaching in Ilo City on the streets in English, and they were understanding me. And so, so anyway, I think that's about all I need to say. So I guess, because you're in the chat, Heffen, what would be an interesting thing to look at? I guess I've read through the article that pretty much summarizes the whole thing. Is there anything that you feel that could be touched on a little bit more, or I could do another program on? If you can't think of anything, that's fine. I'm just sort of fishing out there just for ideas and things to look at. So yeah, Philippines. It's a great place to. Okay, so Heffen hasn't seen this tonight, so that's fine. I just sort of read through the second half of Nehemiah's article, and that was about it. It's a great place to go if you fly into Kuala Lumpur. Kuala Lumpur is a beautiful city, and if you get like Air 8, sorry, my bandwidth just died there because I zoomed in. But going to Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, all these areas are so cheap. Like you can get flights from Kuala Lumpur to Cambodia very cheaply because it's just across the Gulf, and the Philippines and Indonesia. All these places are amazing places to visit. I've been to the Philippines, been to Singapore, I've been to Cambodia, been to Indonesia. Amazing. Had some amazing adventures there. Went to Surabaya down here. Been to Papua New Guinea 13 times down there. So it's an amazing part of the world to go to. A lot of people are just scared to go, but I would just recommend that people just go there and have fun. Heffin says, but what will be interesting is the issue of the difference in age between the first writing and the first re-inking. Yes, that will be interesting. But wasn't it one of the conclusions that it seems like it's from the same ink? I think there were certain parts where they were saying it seems like it's just the same ink. And I was sort of saying, well, perhaps it's just like exactly the same ink, but some, like, I guess if you mix it together, you'll have certain parts floating, certain parts sinking. And if you don't stir it up, it won't get darker. So you can use a lighter ink if you just don't stir it. It's the same chemical compound, but then later on you're using from the bottom of the inkwell, you're using something else, or you're using that and going over the top of it, and so it's creating a darker look. I'm pretty sure that they were saying that. Well, let's just go quickly back to this article, which I've shut down. Unfortunately, I'll just shut all these down. Now, where was I? If I open up, here we are. Heffin says, yes, it seems like the same ink. So both 4th century or both in 9th century. I think this is Ira Rabin's issue. Okay, so I'm not sure of her perspective on that. When we look at this Nazareth issue in the Theta and Tau, this would be a really good one to just go, okay, let's focus in on one issue, like the Theta or the Tau or the Tav, as it would be called in modern Greek. This issue would be very interesting to look at here. So it says the re-inked Theta of the original scribe replaced with the supralinear Tav by the re-inker compared to an apricot Distigmai. So they're comparing these to this. The copper to iron ratios of the re-inked Theta and the re-inker's Tav. So the Theta and the Tav prove they were not written with the same ink. So they're saying that the chemical compound of the Theta is 0.35. The re-inker's Tav is 0.38. And that proves that they have no relation to this. But what they're saying, like, that sort of almost proves that they're very similar in their chemical compound, like compared to the rest of them. Like you got 0.03% or 3 points of difference, however they're measuring that. So it does seem like they're re-inking it in the same scriptorium that it was made in, that the original ink is made in. So this is the thing. This is where I'm saying they have tested some of these, and then they're testing the re-inking, and then they're comparing it with the Distigmai. I think that could be a backdoor into dating the manuscript. Call me crazy, but to me, that when I was reading through this, I was like, actually, they are testing these letters. They are showing us what it's made of, and so can we go through and see how much of this compound is found in 4th century, 5th century, 9th century documents, or is it a completely different chemical compound? And so it's almost like a little glitch in the matrix there. We just sort of found a little hole, and I'm putting my leg in and going, hang on, don't shut the door. Let's look at this, And so anyway, that's what I'm thinking, Heffin. Power of One says, and topping up the ink might add more metal at the bottom over time. That's what I'm thinking. I don't know if that's part of, looking at these manuscripts where, it would be part of that science. But I just know that if you're using a type of, if you're using a type of paint on something, and it's got a metallic base, you have to keep stirring it. You have to keep stirring it, or else it sinks to the bottom, and it can get darker or lighter depending on what you're using. So Power of One says even giving a higher percentage of metal, which is interesting because these darker ones there's not much difference. Like the tub, it does seem to have like 0.03 points more, which is not much, but it's interesting how dark it is. But then again, he does talk. So Heffen says he has to go. Talk later. Cheers, mate. Thanks for joining us. But it does talk about earlier in the article that these are made from like soot, so like ash put in there. So I guess you could have different soots from different trees, different branch or whatever they're using. So I'm not sure how they make up this compound. Hilly Billy says, I find it compelling that so many forgeries came out of the 4th century as if it was a popular hobby. Yeah, that's interesting. And it is an interesting time because it's like, the Council of Nicaea seems to be a time when it's like, okay, that's the cutoff point. They invented the Trinity from there, sort of thing. Some of these groups say that. Hilly Billy is saying, take care. Power of One says you wouldn't want it drying out either, so you might add more. Yeah. So I guess that's where, I'm just, I don't know that much about manuscripts, but I do know a bit about, painting products. And I'm guessing the inks would be the same with a metallic compound in it that would sink and other elements would float. So, and also just like, say, listening to Stephen Boyce today talk on Myth Vision, he was talking about how in these manuscripts, like with Codex Vaticanus, they were talking about the ending and mark being missing, how they've perhaps had, or not how they wrote in lighter ink or anything like that, but how they had to calculate how many pages they had left. Because, see, the thing is, when they're doing these, they have to do it in quires. So it's not like you've just got your book and you open up the page and you just start writing there. You write that side, then you turn it over and you write on the other side on another page. And it's got to all fit together. So you have to sort of measure it out. So this would have been one of the confusing things with Erasmus, with the Book of Revelation, to extrapolate the Greek from a Greek commentary and then put it into, you'd have to sort of write it by hand in your own little manuscript. And then that type of thing would have to be put into like a print thing with, obvious variants and things like that, added or subtracted or whatever, however he got to his text. But it's just interesting. So, but I think we've exhausted this topic for tonight anyway. I've enjoyed talking about manuscripts. Maybe that might be an interesting thing to look at in the future, looking at some of these things, looking at the inks behind some of these manuscripts, looking at what the scribal tools were that they used, because I'm guessing too that you can sort of sense what type of tools were used, whether you've got the same type of and maybe in this article it mentions that, and I've just sort of read over it, because there were some things when I reread them I'm like, well, that makes more sense than the first time. But I guess that's why I've put it on to YouTube so that we can listen through it, get some more ideas, and then create some more conspiracy theories out there. Put your tinfoil hat on. No, just to look at the evidence and weigh it up. Power of One, just for clarification, I mean the little pot they would be dipping the pen in. Yes, I sort of gathered that. You're stirring the pot, Power of One is stirring the pot there. Maybe I should just quickly look that up, because we are talking about that there. So Wikipedia, ancient manuscript ink. We'll see what comes up. Okay, illuminated manuscript. That would be an interesting thing to look at. Okay, so they do have these very old manuscripts between 400 and 600. So let's just look at some of these. I wonder if these have been looked at, tested. Okay, this is also in the Vatican Library. Maybe XRF testing or test manuscript. Illuminated manuscript analysis methodology. Yep, that's exactly what they're doing. Okay, so they're looking at these ones. Okay. Materials and methods. Fluorescent, X-ray fluorescence. It's a full science. You've really got to get right into it. I'm pretty sure that Elijah Hixson, he has a scientific background, so this might be part of his writings. He's been quiet for a while. I think he's got a bit carried away with chatting online and stuff. I used to chat with him all the time, but okay. I guess I'm looking for similar type of things like the CU 0.001 figures. And okay, CU and K. Black pigments in the ink. I guess just look, if you didn't even look into manuscripts, but I guess even art has these type of things. So art forgers, if you just did a course in art forgery, you would come up to speed with a lot of this sort of stuff. But then again, they do write. Most of these pieces of art back in those days have writing underneath it. Yeah, very interesting. CU. Here we go. Imaging on a 15th century's illuminated manuscript. Imaging and quantitative analysis to understand the artist's technique. So I guess that's the thing when you go through, all the paintings of those days, all the writing at the bottom of the painting, that they're probably using very similar inks to that of the Reformation. Wow, that's amazing what they can do nowadays. Parabon says, yeah, I think it's a good argument, makes sense. Hilly Billy says, wood stains are a good example of Parabon's idea. The solids will settle out very quickly. The larger pot too, though, yes, that's interesting. Because, if you have like a pot that is your main ink well that everyone's going to, that you've bought from someone, you might have a whole barrel of this, and that has to be stirred every time you top up your little inkwell, that both of them are going to, the metallic compounds are going to sink in both of those. So you could just have one that no one stirs, and that's a light colored ink. But you could have one that everyone stirs, and that eventually is a darker color. So stained wood floors for a lifetime. If I had a time machine, I'd get rich by going to the 4th century selling Sharpie markers. Yes. Manuscripts that have problems. Okay, so they've got CU and Z equals 29. So I'm not sure if they're even using the same methodology. But anyway, all that information is out there. Hidden library, visualizing fragments of medieval manuscripts. So it looks like this is how they're measuring everything nowadays, art, manuscripts. Yeah, very interesting, amazing. Power of One says, laughing out loud, but they would then all be labeled modern forgeries. Right, and Nick wouldn't have a job. No, I would be doing videos on something else, but we are stuck doing videos on Vaticanus and Sinaiticus until they're thoroughly tested. Well, at least we don't have to, speculate about the dots. It's like, okay, well, they were in that period of time. I'm guessing that they used it in that period of time because of the Clementine Vulgate and the homework that went behind that. And so they would have been looking at these things, and also with apocryphal writings, Septuagint studies, these type of things. And so anyway, guys, I'm going to switch this off. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for enduring through my reading of these articles. As chunky as it was, I know that I'm not the best reader. I struggle over a lot of words, and especially something scientific like this, it can be very hard. But hopefully you can put aside my thick Australian accent and my stumbling over the words, and hopefully you realize that these Distigmai are from the 15th, 16th century. So God bless you guys. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you in our next little thing that we do.